I call Deputy Captain Connolly at this stage.
Chair. On the last occasion when you came in, I was overwhelmed by the gender equality, and the thought occurred to me that if it was a little bit more balanced, you might be in less difficulty. But I say that tongue-in-cheek and semi-seriously. Okay. I think I heard on the last occasion. Sorry, I'll start with conflicts of interest. Have any of the board got conflicts of interest in any way? No. No. Okay. And so I think you said on the last occasion that legislation preempted you from owning dogs. Is that right?
It doesn't. Legislation. I think I may have suggested that, but legislation don't prevent us from owning dogs. But just to clarify my own position, I don't own dogs, and I haven't owned dogs for a number of years. But my family and another family, we have a syndicate. But I don't own dogs, and you can very
just let me put my questions in context, because I'm not here to highlight stuff that's personal. It's in terms of value for money. And obviously you're in trouble because of various problems in the past, including investing unwisely at a particular time, a previous board. But in addition, serious issues in relation to governance and lack of integrity. They've been highlighted. So I'm going to come to those reports. We start with the Dalton report and we go forward, and there's a Morris report, and there's a presentation to the Agricultural Committee, and there's the other main report. I think you've taken them on now, have you? What's the name of the accountants? Ms. Ayres, is it? Or?
Ms. Ayres are in internal auditors.
They're your internal auditors now, but they did an independent report. No, it was Indicon. I beg your pardon, Indicon. So we've had numerous reports highlighting governance issues, serious issues in relation to animal welfare, serious issues in relation to the monitoring of illegal substances and so on. So it's in that context, in terms of value for money. So I go back again. Have any of you got a conflict of interest? Okay. And so when you inadvertently told us that you weren't allowed own greyhounds on the last occasion, that was wrong. You are?
We are allowed.
Okay, because what was said on the last occasion, which I found amusing, really, given the lack of gender representation, was that you said you had none of you had dogs, and you had them in your wife's names.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Deputy, I said that inadvertently.
Is that true, or what?
No, I have no dogs in my wife's name, or as far as I understand, any of the board members. Oh. I wasn't leading anyone astray.
Okay.
You did say it, though. You did say it. You did say it. I'm reading the record there.
Yeah. No, I did say it. I did say it, but I am making it very, very clear. There are no conflicts of interest, and we don't own greyhounds. And I mean, it's very easy to check that with the ICC database.
That's okay. I want to use my time just more efficiently. I only want to clarify matter. You own a greyhound, do you?
My wife has greyhounds.
All right.
What she does in her own business is her own business, and I don't tell her what to do, but she has greyhounds in her name, yes.
Well, that's great to hear in the 21st century that she's independent. But that's reassuring. But in any event, I'm simply just going back on what was said on the last occasion. Okay. What happened to gender representation on the board, by the way? When Indicon recommended that you only serve so many terms, and I know that you have said repeatedly that we have failed as in the Dáil to bring in the appropriate legislation, but couldn't you have taken the recommendations which you did on all the other recommendations? Why aren't you implementing that recommendation that the board be limited to 3 years?
Deputy, we have a lady on the board. Just unfortunately, through business commitments, she's out of the country today.
And the last occasion as well.
She was, she just happened to be out of the country.
Yeah. I didn't see her name now. I must have missed it.
I know. Miss Heffernan, Rena Heffernan.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There's 7, so.
6 board members and
the chair. Okay. And why haven't you taken on the recommendation that the time period should be limited for the board?
Well, prior to the Endicon recommended that board members
maximum of 2-3,
and the chairman serve maximum of 2 5-year periods.
Yeah.
But that legislation is not.
No, forget the legislation. Why aren't you taking the recommendation on board, or have you taken it on board?
Well, we don't. Unfortunately, we don't appoint the board.
Yeah.
The board was appointed through the PS, and the minister appoints the board.
Well, just 1 second now. I don't think it's appointed through the PS. Let's get that clear as well. Is it appointed? The minister nominates people onto the board, And the Taoiseach actually nominates yourself, I think. Is that right? The chair?
I think in the department will clarify that.
Yeah, Deputy, I suppose this is a question for the department, really, and not for the board. So, I mean, the board doesn't appoint its own members.
But who appoints them?
It's the minister appoints the board members.
Without interview?
No, well, there's a system in place for the last several years.
Could you clarify that system?
Yes, I will.
Good. Yeah.
So, what happens is the board, the minister rather, advertises for particular skills that would be desirable on the board. So, for example, veterinary, financial, legal would have been some of the skills advertised for in recent years. People apply through the Public Appointment Service. There's a board in there that shortlists applicants based on their CVs, including independent members. And a shortlist is then prepared for the Minister of the day, and the shortlist, which could be 7 or 10 people, is sent to the Minister, and the Minister makes a selection from the shortlist. So that's the system as it exists today.
How long is that in existence?
Well, the last 4 board appointees, I think, have been through that system. I think last three.
What period? What period of time is that?
The last 4 years, I think.
The last 4 years. Okay. And is there an interview process on that?
There can be, but there hasn't been.
There hasn't been?
No.
Okay. Because one of the notable things was the lack of skills on the board.
And
if you're advertising and you're looking for particular skills, and then we have an independent commentator saying that one of the most obvious things is a lack of skills, how did that happen?
No. Well, we have responded to that because when we advertise for these posts, we look for particular kinds of skills. So the people appointed to the board in the last several years have included a veterinarian, senior veterinarian, who was the head of the EU's Food and Veterinary Office, and he was Chief Veterinary Officer in the Department of Agriculture at one time. He's also a lawyer. We've appointed somebody with legal expertise, who's the State Solicitor for Cork, and we've appointed a financial expert, Mr. Creed, who is Chief Executive Officer of Bank of Ireland Finance. So they're the kinds of skills we advertise for, and they were the appointees.
They weren't there before that, obviously?
No.
No, okay. And we're told that's history. Sorry?
Just can I add one little point to what the chairman said, Deputy? On the executive team, we have one lady, our Director of Racing Governance and Compliance.
Good. Okay. Now let me go to problems with regulate. Well, look, they're the reports, aren't they? You've read them all, presumably. You have. Okay. And so let's start. What recommendations haven't been implemented? You appeared before the Joint Committee on Agriculture and Food in January 2016. They made a number of recommendations. Have they all been implemented?
Yes.
They have.
They've all been responded to.
Oh, no. Have they all been implemented? 12 recommendations. Have they all been implemented?
In my opinion, 11 of them, 12 of them have been implemented. There's one recommendation at the beginning of a recommendation, one which perhaps falls into the role of the Department of Agriculture. I don't know whether the Department of Agriculture would agree with that or not. It's the power report, an update of the power report.
The first recommendation, the committee recommends the compilation of an up-to-date economic assessment of the industry, including a full breakdown of staff and so on, in order to accurately reflect the current state of the industry. Was that done? Not by IGB. Okay, so that wasn't done. That's a serious recommendation, and there are 13 of the 13 recommendations. The chairperson, number 1 hasn't been implemented. What else hasn't been implemented?
Deputy, off the top of my head, I can't exactly say. My understanding is that we responded to and have implemented.
I can't accept that at this point. I'll tell you why. Because I have so many reports before me. And the problem was that the recommendations weren't implemented. Had the original Dalton report been implemented, I think it's Dalton in 2006, been acted on, we wouldn't be in serious trouble. Had each report been acted on, and I'm specifically asking you, I get an answer, yes, they've been implemented except one. I go back to number 1, I ask you, I'm told it's not implemented. So we have 11 recommendations. First one, very important. All of them very important. Let me go to recommendation 11, and this is something I absolutely put my hands up and say, I thought it was a misprint. The committee recommends that the ongoing issues concerning the breeding of greyhounds with dogs deceased for I'm going to have to read this. The committee recommends that the ongoing issues concerning the breeding of greyhounds with dogs deceased for 2 years or more, registered in the stud book by the ICC, must be addressed immediately. Has that been addressed? I now know what it means, I have to say. I made inquiries, and presumably the semen from a dead dog is kept for 2 years. You're allowed to use it for that 2-year period for the purpose of breeding in 4 stud places throughout the country. Just now, please, because my time is limited. Has that been implemented?
That's a very complicated. That's a very complicated question, and if
Okay.
I will take you through it as best I can.
No, just one thing. Subject to the chair not being fair to you, and I'm absolutely want to be fair. I've only so much time. That was a recommendation. And even I, who had no knowledge of this, realise now what it means. Was it implemented? I understand it wasn't, and so I want to be fair to you. I understand you've got a legal letter in relation to a certain dog, for example, winning a race.
Right, Chairman.
Just let me finish, please. My question, and I understand that it's not been complied with, and that you've received a letter from a solicitor in relation to a certain dog, and that's just one example. Now, I don't want a detour. This man is watching me. So I want an answer. Has it been complied with?
You're correct. It hasn't been complied with.
Okay, lovely.
Just so you understand, we don't control the stud book. That's the Irish Coursing Club.
Yeah.
Right. There's going to be primary legislation required to address that issue. We're before the Agricultural Committee on the 30th of this month, and it's one of the issues that's being raised.
I've said that. I've seen that, and I've seen the draft legislation. I've seen the proposal to remove this. The existing legislation obliges you to comply with that 2-year rule. You haven't complied with it. So you're allowing dogs to race illegally. Is that correct? Dogs that have been bred with the use of semen after 2 years, taking part in races illegally. Is that correct?
As I understand it, there was a decision made in 2008 which required legislation, and that legislation hasn't been passed, which was not to impose the 2-year sanction.
I don't think that's the position now. Let me just be... No. We won't be thinking here now. I'm asking questions just in relation to it. You were obliged under existing legislation or regulations. You're still obliged. New legislation came in from a certain day forward, but it wasn't retrospective.
Correct.
Okay. So for those dogs that are caught prior to this new legislation, I think it was November 14, you're not complying with that?
That's correct.
Okay.
As indicated, I want to quickly...
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Well, maybe the deputy has answered it, in fact. So there was a new regulation introduced in this decision to introduce this rule was made in 2005. The board made the decision, as I understand it, in 2008 to revoke it on basis of practicality. They didn't. In 2014, the rule was revoked, but it couldn't be made retrospective, and we now have a provision in the bill in the Ag Committee to deal with the issue.
Mr. Gleeson, you're now helping the evasion and the obfuscation. It's a simple question. Obliged up to 14, all dogs up to 14, not being complied with. 2 directors have confirmed not being. So I leave the implications of that to the people who were affected by it. And sorry, am I doing something wrong? Sorry, I beg your pardon.
You've accused me of evasion.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Gleeson. I apologise if I've said something wrong. Sorry.
No, I just want to be clear. All I offered to do was to explain the situation as it is, and so I explained the regulatory framework. So clearly there were dogs running between the time of the introduction of the rule and 2014, which didn't comply with it. I accept that. Nor was I trying to suggest otherwise. Not for
I apologise, Mr. Gleeson. I'm just conscious of time,
Sure.
and he has said today 15 minutes, and it was said by 2 already.
Sure.
So the point I'm trying to get out is the existing law is not being complied with. And I leave that to the directors to face and the people affected by it. So I'm going to move on now to the...
It's the last topic, because time is tight.
Oh, good Lord. I was only starting.
I know. Well, you'll get a second opportunity.
You
get a second opportunity.
I think we should have a little bit of leeway, because on the last occasion there was enormous leeway. Just a little bit.
Deputy Kelly
I don't agree that there should have... I don't think there should have been leeway, but there's a big difference between a half an hour and 10, 15 minutes. The question in relation...
I just would like to make one further point. When dogs were registered, we don't have the registration of dogs. We got council advice, and we were advised that dogs that were registered had a legitimate expectation of being able to run. That's why I said earlier it was complicated, and maybe we need more time to go through this than
Just 1 second. I asked, was it being complied with? You said no. I asked, was there have you received a letter from a solicitor in relation to this matter? You have. Okay. Let me move on to another recommendation. And again, it's back to confidence. It's back to integrity. That's why this is a mess, isn't it? This is why there's a picket on Shelburne Park. There's huge problems here with trust. You'd agree with that? I mean, there's been a vote of no confidence, I understand, by the breeders and owners in the board. So, my question is, no, sorry, I will let you answer. My question is, do you agree there's a breach of confidence, a lack of trust? Would you accept that?
I accept, and I made the point the last day. As a board, we were in an impossible position. I've explained that at length.
Okay,
if I'm asked a question, Chairman, I need some opportunity to answer it. We're in an impossible position. We had very tough decisions to make. We made them. Tough decisions are tough decisions. You know, you decide and you divide. When you make tough decisions, of course there are people that are not happy, and of course there'll be votes of no confidence. But we have to manage the business that's best for the industry.
Sharon, just now, you have to give me a little time. I'm not interfering with your ability or your power to make decisions. I'm simply saying, reflecting on what's happening, there's a lack of confidence. There's a big division between the board on the ground. That's all. You accept that? I'm not asking you to accept responsibility for it.
I accept that by some people. I mean, Deputy, you're making the point here that opinion is the opinion held by all dog people. That is far from the truth.
That's fine.
Far from the truth.
That's fine. I accept
it's the opinion of a certain percentage.
You don't accept it, and that's fine. You can disagree with me. In relation to the consultative forum, one of the strong recommendations which I was getting to, there was a consultative forum to be set up. Was that set up?
Yes.
A forum. Well, tell me a little bit about that now, because on the last occasion that I didn't hear, it's an absolute. All stakeholders would be involved.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me.
In December 2016, we invited. Firstly, Deputy, it's a very splintered industry. Always has been. In December 2015, we individually brought in all the stakeholders. And during 2016, we brought together the stakeholders on 3 occasions, 2 or 3. I'm not quite sure. I will say that not all stakeholders accepted our invitation, but we invited all stakeholders in. And we as a board, as an industry, we absolutely believe that a stakeholders forum is a very good way of bringing the industry forward.
What I'm going to ask you, just because I just have 1 or 2 questions left, it was a strong recommendation of this. You've told me now 2 weren't, just a second,
sorry.
The stakeholders. Can you come back? Are there minutes of those meetings? Because this was a strong recommendation. Formal meetings be held with all stakeholders. Can we get minutes of those? Great. Let me move on to the 2 last things before
I can clarify for you. The first meeting of the National Greyhound Forum was hosted on the 15th of March 2016. There are representatives from a cross-section of groups. There's a list of the groups and various people from across the industry. There are details of the matters that were discussed, and there are minutes from it. The second meeting of the National Greyhound Forum took place on the 14th of July in 16, again with representatives from a cross-section of groups. The details can all be furnished separately rather than going through the whole list. And the third meeting of the National Greyhound Forum took place on 10th of November 2016. It was attended by the Minister Andrew Doyle TD, Rebecca Chapman, Horse and Greyhound Racing, Chagask and DFM. And there was an overview of proposed legislation discussed at that forum. And again, there were representatives from a broad cross-section of the industry. These are structured meetings that are agenda-based, minutes taken. Some different people have different views on them. Some people choose to attend, some choose not to attend, but there is a structure in place, and there is a commitment that the next forum meeting will take place 1 month after the reopening of Shelburne.
I'm going to come back to that in my second round. Just in relation to the strategic plan and business plans. It was never... Indicon didn't say sell Harold's Cross. Isn't that right? It did not say sell Harold's Cross. It made a recommendation that you look at selling a number of assets, that you would consider was the word. And consider looking at a number of assets, including land in Cork, including Harold's Cross and including other assets. Isn't that right? Okay. And it also, I told, between that and the agriculture, asked you to do an annual review every year. It asked you to look at each individual racing track and come back and see which was good, which was bad, and make decisions. The only three making money was Cork, Shelburne and Harold's Cross. You've come back and said Harold's Cross and Shelburne are not viable, they're so near each other, but they were making money. Both were, three of them stood out. So, just what assessment have you done? If we look at Galway, what assessment have you done in relation to the loss there? What plans have you got? And equally with each one, and tied in with that, just clarify in relation to the company running each racetrack. Is that a separate company entirely for the purpose of just operating it, or have they any other decision?